Hey, can you hear me? You sound like a robot, but not like I can't hear your voice, like one designed to attack me and kill me. It's just like, what's it called? Like a fly thing? I can't remember what those are called.
Does this help?
Yes, that helps a lot.
Okay. I have switched you to the laptop microphone, so I now have to carry this laptop with me everywhere I go.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Well, we do it for quality.
Yeah, so you played the beginner's guide. You hated it. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, I took a couple of minutes to read a couple of reviews and be like, what are other people's thoughts about this? Sort of in the time between when I was like, I really hate this game and now. Um, yeah, I don't know how cohesive these thoughts will be yet, but it made me deeply mad.
Um, we're not here for
Deeply ill
cohesive
with
thoughts.
anger.
Oh yeah, I mean, so do you know the story behind why the game was developed?
No.
So
I
yeah,
did not intend to know very much. So,
yeah, yeah. No, it's not like a big long story, but it's just a Davy Reedon. He made the Stanley Parable, and it
mhm.
started out as a mod. Um, and then it kind of blew up, and then he made his own game, and I think he made like a deluxe version or something. But this game is sort of him dealing with the weird sort of depression he got after finding success in a thing he was trying to do, and how everyone just kind of like attached themselves to his work and like assumed things about him, and sort of this weird crossing of the boundary that happens a lot, especially since the internet, of people make a thing and then now suddenly they are the product.
So I remember playing the original Stanley Parable when it was a mod, and I played it when it came out, and I played the deluxe version. And there's like I don't know if the beginner's guide has necessarily soured it to me. I haven't quite figured out whether or not that's how I feel about this. But there's something like deeply aggrandizing, is that the word I'm thinking of? About the beginner's guide that I find deeply insufferable in a like, how to maybe put this? It doesn't matter to me that Coda isn't real.
Right.
Whether or not, because I don't think Coda is real. And it would have been more meaningful to me if that had been said. Because it has a very sort of like, I don't care who might hurt to get ahead feeling around it without it being an acknowledgement that this was in fact like self-flatulation over being like a perceived perhaps slight against an individual, because the like point of it being that this person was so deeply harmed by this thing I am doing, and so I will continue to harm them because I'm a bad person. Look at how bad of a person I am. I feel so terrible about being such a bad person without resolution. And so I have this like continual recurring feeling about guilt as this act that people engage in which they feel like they're working on something without working on anything. So I think like my takeaway from this is just being like, oh, I feel so guilty for this like perhaps fictitious slight that I have done against someone. So I'll just keep doing it. And like that just feels bad.
Yeah, I mean, this is venturing into the territory of something that is kind of newer about games where not all of them are about fun anymore. They're not about evoking the same emotions. There is a lot out there that is designed to make you feel bad, and I think this one is, you know. Um, I I would almost, like, not directly. I don't think it's so cut and dry, but I would almost call it like a attack from Davey Wreden to people who take these games and, you know, run them to death, basically. There's a really interesting small video by a popular YouTube guy, H Bomber guy, and most of his stuff is like hours long, but he has one about.
I was gonna say a small H bomber video is like what, 40 minutes?
I think this one was actually like 15 minutes. It's like one of the few digestible videos he has, but it's a small video about Undertale, and he basically is like, people have talked about Undertale enough. I'm okay. I don't need to go into it. But there's one part that he talks about that not a lot of people did, where there's a lot of points in that game where if you go around and you look for everything and you do everything possible, eventually the characters just look at you and go, "Don't you have something better to do, man? Like, isn't there something else you should be doing right now?" And I think this is another game that dives into that. Like, it's supposed to feel bad and it's supposed to be ambiguous, and that's supposed to be a trap. You know, the idea of, is this story real, takes away from the idea of, what does this story mean, you know? And I think that's kind of like the trap setup.
That's sort of why, like, I don't actually care if Coda is a real person. I think that, like, the intention to me on whether or not Coda is real is like a red herring of irrelevance.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. It like, I think what is perhaps something that like I am interesting of asking other people is like what their experience as artists are, because like I have been the person who has been exploited in an artistic relationship. And
Mm-hmm.
so like there is likely a lot of anger that I feel about that, in that I think that it is like a particularly eh, disgusting thing to do to other artists. And so like the very idea that this boundary was A, not only crossed, but then B, was sort of like, I think, what did I had written? That it feels like someone dug up a corpse and then asked everyone to think that they were so special for doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, where, like, there is this very sort of, like, aggrandizing, "Aren't I so special?" Which, like, is part of the struggle of being an artist and making art, but I do wish that there was, like, some sort of following action to the denouement that is here, and there's not, and that I think just, like, makes it, to me, a very frustrating commentary for a larger public conversation about the meaning of artistic relationship, not only between individuals, but also with their own work, that doesn't offer guidance to getting out of what is being described.
Well, I think that's an interesting thing, right? Is something like this, like, what do you think about something like this where it is an exploration of a topic without necessarily an instruction attached to it? You know, because there's a lot of stories that go like, you know, my dad, he once was too greedy and now you shouldn't be greedy, and it's like it has a moral attached to it, but but you know, what about these stories that are just an exploration of something that is and don't necessarily have an answer for you? You know, would it even be, you know, there's a possible version of this game that is irresponsible and gives bad advice, right? Like, and it goes at the end and it's like, now remember, never make anything good because people hate you for it. Like,
No, I think that, like, there is, at least in my reading, advice that is here, but
mhm.
it's because the advice is wallow, for lack of a better term. Like, it's like, okay, so you just, like, feel bad, and that's it. Like, there is no there doesn't need to be an answer in ambiguity. But currently, this sort of, like, ending as it is presented is just kind of like, you know, can I swear?
Yeah, go ahead.
Feel like shit and then rise above it, which, like, isn't really it's, like, not really very poignant, and
Yeah.
almost to me, like, undercuts everything that has sort of been pontificated
Mhm.
before that, and so, like, I don't know, it's just sort of like, woe is me. It's so hard. It's like, okay, just played a 4-hour game for you to be like, "And actually, I feel bad, and art is hard." It's like, "Yeah, we know. Art is hard."
I mean, as much as I agree with you, I do think that's a bit unfair. Like the idea of like art is hard, and oh yeah, we know that. You are somebody who's very involved in creative
It's
spaces,
true.
and
No,
like
this is
I
entirely a reading from a specific perspective.
I guarantee you there's a lot of people who played that game and they're like trying to track down somebody named Coda, and they don't understand that that's like a musical term. And they're like, no, it's just a regular guy. Like I meet Joe and Coda at the grocery store sometimes. um no, I definitely like, I just as a side note, I am going based off of memory. I haven't played this game recently.
Oh, yeah, no, totally.
But
I'm like
should play a game and then come back and be like, wow, that feels fun. There should be the opposite of like play a game and come back and be like, wow, I feel terrible inside.
oh,
But
no.
um
Hello.
can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Oh yeah, sorry, my internet sucks right now because I got a new computer and the
Okay.
Wi-Fi card in it is bad and I need to replace it.
I think, like, perhaps this is so for context, I'm currently at my aunt's house, rather than being at my own house. And so her and my uncle were avid art collectors. So this house is literally filled from floor to ceiling, every wall, surface, and available like thing in between with art that they have like collected over many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and unfortunately my uncle has passed, but he was a poet. And so he would trade poetry and labor for like all of this art over 40 years. And like I think the reverence in which one should hold not only your collaborators but friends in an artistic space is something that feels not like it is currently missing in games in sort of like a wider context. There are tons of pockets of really lovely folks who do this, but because it is first and foremost a medium that grew in a very capitalistic sense, that, like, really the only way you got to make games for a huge portion of the history of game design and development was in a commercial space,
Mm-hmm.
that, like, this conversation for games feels revolutionary and new in many regards, but it's just a conversation happening in rooms that those designers never had opened the doors to. So, yeah.
Right.
There's, like, not really a, like, poetic end to that thought. It's just kind of like it's fascinating to me to see it in a perspective of this being, I guess, like a revolutionary conversation to some. Like when people got really like frustrated with AI content and like 60 years of generative art practice, we're like, we already figured out the the moralistic standpoints that we all agreed upon like in the early aughts. Like, what are we doing? Why are we having these conversations again?
Yeah.
And it's just because the people who chose not to go into those rooms suddenly were like, "Oh, we're gonna have this conversation." And you're like, "There's, like, so much context that you're missing, though."
Yeah. And this is one of the things that I think is really hard about the internet, is that idea of like, what is the goal of like global communication? A lot of people think it's like, oh, so you can become an expert in literally every
Mhm.
topic. And so it's like, there are a lot of people who, you're right, didn't choose to open that door of like talking about generative art because it wasn't on the news before and they realistically don't care. But you know, now they're kind of putting themselves in a conversation where they're not experts. And I think that
Mhm.
is one of the things that this game talks about, is like, we live now in a world where everyone wants to talk about things when they're hot, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't even mean that they care about the material. It just means that they want to talk about it. And that can be kind of damaging to an artist who finds success.
Yeah. I think that like it so did you play the Parable when it came out and then also when it was released, or did you play it when it was released or only the demo? Like, I'm in the network of Stanley Parable experiences. Where are you?
I saw, so I saw a bit of the Stanley Parable when it was released. That was kind of my experience with it. I have never really dug too far into that game. I have the deluxe edition downloaded. I want to play it. I just forget a lot. Um,
Eh, that's the backlog is real. 'Cause so it was very fascinating to, like, have played it at these multiple points because, like, and this is just sort of going to brush over any spoilers if you don't wanna know anything about the deluxe edition, but it does have a very similar sort of, like, moment in the very early beginnings of it that has this sort of, like, "What is the point of me making art? Why do people look at the things that I do? Why do people find meaning about this? Why do I care so much about what people think of me?" And I think that, like, you know, it is a good conversation, but there's also something inherently very self-indulgent about it being a one-sided conversation, which is, like, part of, I guess, like, what is said in Portion, the beginner's guide, where, like, there is no point in having these conversations with yourself. But I would push back against that. I think it's incredibly important to have like, conversations with yourself about the meaning of your work and about, like, the interests that you have and are driven by and interrogate those. And, like, that is a very private space, and the fact that this is, like, you know, put upon a plinth for, like, everyone to see in 360-degree intimacy does do a disservice to someone's mental health.
mhm.
I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah. I mean, like, there's an argument to be made that like the current way that we have set up art in technology is that that's the goal, is the 360-degree scrutinizing every inch of everything, you know. I can't think of a lot of things that are sustainable on the internet without being heavily commoditized, heavily advertised, and heavily popular.
Yeah, the internet really ruined things, except for having this lovely conversation on Twitch.com. Um,
I mean, it's
no, like, so sorry, go ahead.
I so it's, you know, it's one of those things where it's like the internet has ruined things, but it's also like taken over all access. So yeah, you gotta have the conversation in the middle of a sponsor read or something, you know. Like, that's how a lot of people do
Mhm.
things. Something I think a lot of people forget about is like, the internet feels so important and so big that people are like, yeah, these industries, you know, technology, games, those are baby industries in terms of everything else in the world, basically. Like, these are the most recent giant fields that have entered. So they're the only ones that have really gotten to grown up with the heavy commoditization practice of like modern society, you know. Like, art existed back before people could arbitrage, really, like go and, you know, across country lines and sell things and do all that. Like, now people are day trading from their houses and the whole landscape is different.
Mhm. And our poor monkey brains never meant to have this much information.
Yeah, but we gotta adapt.
Like, that I think about in relationship to games is comics. Because comics is, like, not quite as young of an industry, but it
Hmm.
went through a very similar period in sort of the, like, late '80s, early '90s as this sort of, like, mid like, late aughts, early 10s that games went through, where there's this sort of, like, moment in which everyone goes, like, "Oh, we're gonna be, like, poppy and serious and, like, you know, titties out and there's blood. Oh my god, aren't we such, like, a grown-up medium?" And then has this sort of, like, counter resurgence afterwards in which there is sort of this push of conversation and, like, more I hesitate to say, like, radicalism, but, like, that the conversations actually become more adult over this sort of, like, very prescriptive teenage idea of what an adult actually is. And I think that, like, one of the tragedies for games is that to do this in the same sort of way that, like, many people had to do this because the internet existed, in which it had to do that publicly in a way that, like, couldn't facilitate the same type of things that, like, early '90s zines were doing, in which, like, there is this very sort of, like, intimate trading of, like, tiny art that other genres, other mediums got to have.
When you say that that kind of stuff can't happen, like as somebody who's not as familiar with the space, like I would consider small like zines and stuff, like you could see itch.io and a lot of the small indie games on there as a similar type of exchange, right? Of just
Yes.
little pieces.
The, like, thing that I'm trying to isolate for games is that it has to do that publicly. Like, if you were sending someone a zine, you would just, like, mail it to their house, right?
Mhm.
And so, like, there are ways in which to obfuscate the existence of a hosted game, but, like, at its very core, being a digital medium has to exist online
Right.
within the public eye and access to the wider sort of internet in which anyone can stumble upon it.
Right. Yeah, that as part of the inherency of the medium, I get that. But I do wonder like how impactful that is. You know, I do think there's a lot of things on the internet that's like there is the chance that someone could take them and run wild with it, but that chance is so low that it becomes, you know, there can be intimate spaces online. There can be Discord servers with 10 people for a couple years and they get to know each other.
Mhm. It is, I think, like, part of what is fascinating about this perhaps fictitious relationship between Warden and Coda is, like, ostensibly, this seems to have been a series of emails,
Hmm.
so, like, that's cool. But I am still very, like, I don't think that was a real person.
I don't think anybody really thinks it's a real person when they dig into it. I think that is, once again, like you said, meant to be sort of a red herring of like, it's meant to blur the line of reality and fiction as much as possible so that the message is as close to home as it can be. You know, there's something, the thing that I really like about this game is that it does something that I don't think a lot of people have really thought of so far, which is the idea of doing it in the second person. Like the idea
Mm,
is that you're being talked to by Davy Reedon. It is not like there's no pretense of I did this or they did that. It's like he's like, hey, hello, this is my email. What's up? Um, so that makes it very impactful and it makes it feel a lot more
Davey, put
real.
your email in the beginner's guide. Let me email you and tell me I don't like your game.
I think you can actually go to the email you said at the beginning and send
Oh,
feedback
I
and
don't
stuff.
remember that.
Yeah,
Maybe I probably won't. I'm just gonna be like, I think.
this is another thing about games and stuff. Different versioning makes it kind of hard to do certain things to like have a consistent experience. I think updates are
Yeah.
great, fix bugs, but you know, there's a larger conversation to be had of like, if somebody plays a game when it first comes out and then they add mountains and mountains of content afterwards, and then someone plays it, then are they having the same experience, and should they be rated the same? I have that issue with Baldur's Gate 3. It makes me a little angry.
Oh, what does Baldur's Gate 3 make you angry?
Um, I think it's a great game hamstrung by the fact that it was put out when it crashed all the time and a lot of things were missing, and it's giving it, there's a lot of people kind of giving it a pass for that, and I'm like, no, if you know, it's a good game, but if I can't finish a battle, that should be said. Someone should say something about that.
I stopped playing Baldur's Gate because I was playing it on Steam Deck. I also have to say, the beginner's guide on Steam Deck, not very good. You can't move the camera without using the touchpad on the
Yeah.
screen, not either of the side touchpads, the
Oh.
actual screen, and the mouse sensitivity is really freaking high, even if you turn it all the way down. I stopped playing Baldur's Gate because they made me choose who to date, and I have this problem with games that allow me to date people where I don't really wanna play Baldur's Gate more than once. Just let me date all of the characters that I wanna date in one run without conflict, because I am sorry, it's a 300-hour game. I don't have, like, 1,500 hours of game in me.
Yeah. Yeah. For
But
Baldur's Gate, like I have issues with some of the design decisions. I have issues with some of the development decisions. But the main issue I have is just I don't feel good about playing through a game and then having to ignore several crashes, several bugs, and be like, "Oh, they'll fix it later." And it's like, that's called early access. We have a thing for that.
it was in early access for a long time.
Yeah, but when the game came out, Act 3 was majorly, had a lot of issues for people and was not very finishable. Um, which, I I just don't like that. I like, like I said, like you said, it's a 300-hour game, and I don't want to spend more time in it doing nothing, redoing decisions, doing
Yeah.
all that stuff. Like, I could understand people ignoring it if it was like a 10-hour experience and they're like, oh, it crashed, I'll just go back 20 minutes. But it's like, these are hours. This is a really big game and a really big investment. And you're also asking me to ignore very, very critical. Like, I've never seen my console crash like it did with Baldur's Gate. It would freeze multiple minutes at a time and just be like, eh.
I think, like, so I see this, like, very fascinating discussion that happens in narrative-based games, where everyone has this sort of, like, expectation in which there needs to be as many narrative choices as possible,
Mhm.
but, like, I don't know how much does it add after a certain point, I think. Like, does it matter that there's, like, 80 different outcomes to every conversation? Because, like, and I think that, like, maybe I've never really particularly enjoyed D&D as a system for tabletop RPGing. I prefer other systems in the times that I have played tabletop RPGs.
Mhm.
But, like, the reason why it works is because there is a human being on the other side who is, like, reacting to what it is that you're doing and, like, readjusting the story to better fit what is happening. And so, like, inherently by its very design, Baldur's Gate can't necessarily recreate that, and doing so is like a development sinkhole of scope. Because, like, yeah, you could add more content in narrative. How
Mhm.
many people will see it? Maybe 2 or 3. And, like, do you do that over critical fixes because that's what you think the game needs? Like, I don't
Mhm.
know. That's just like a general philosophical question about game design, but
Yeah. And just a quick note, like as much as I'm like, there's always going to be bugs, there's always going to be errors and stuff. When you say that they were like doing critical fixes, there was a couple different patch notes that came out where I kept coming back and like seeing if the game would not crash as much. And there were times when they were like, we put fur on the cat, and then I opened the game and it crashed, and I'm like, okay, cool. So I'm glad you did that. um,
yeah.
so that's what I mean when I say developmental decisions. But also the overall design of it is very much like when what you're talking about. I think it's a lot more akin to what a lot of people think about when they're in the space. It's like this sort of sandbox style where you have a starting point and then you see where people go and then you sort of build the railroad out as you go along. But there are plenty of people who play the game a lot more like stuck to a fixed path. There are people who have like maps and stuff drawn out and whatever, and it's like if somebody wants to run the opposite way from a town that I spent time and effort building out, usually people will find a way to get them to that town. So I think that's more of the design that Baldur's Gate 3 was going for, was this more like structured railroaded adventure rather than like a full mental sandbox, which is more of the benefit of like tabletop role play, is you can do theater of the mind, you can go wherever. But some people just, they like the power fantasy of being a wizard who can look at somebody and say kill and they die.
So I'm not going to be able to find this Venn diagram likely, but The Aesthetics of Play by Brian Upton has a Venn diagram of like game design as sort of like what the player thinks they can do, what the designer allows you to do, and then what the player believes to be possible, which are all like sort of like larger subsetting circles inside of them, which I might be remembering the categories wrong, but you sort of have like this very, because games are infinitely possible, right? You can put anything into a game, save, I don't know, transdimensional transportation.
I
But
save a
like
person.
but the like because you are an architect of a world, the player is never going to necessarily know the bounds in which you have created until they are expressed to them. So they have their own expectations. The designer has their own like creation within that circle and outside of that circle, and then there is the choices that are presented to the player themselves. And I think like what has always sort of confounded me in terms of what an open world game can be is like how far away people can get into that type of design. Like, when you like see a Kickstarter, right? And it's always someone's first game and they're like, I'm gonna make an MMO. And you're like, please don't make an MMO as your first game. You'll never make a game again. And they're like, there's gonna be like soil ecology where like, if you like do farming, because there's farming and crafting and gunsmithing and also like weather patterns that you can control with a magic system that's also an alchemy system because you can forge blades. And you're like, this is too many systems. Like, I think that there's this sort of expectation when it comes to, because games can be so infinite, folks want games to do everything that they could possibly do without respect to the fact that that is extremely difficult and impossible for a designer to be able to do. I
Yeah.
don't really know what the point of this comment is.
It's
Don't make an MMO as your first game. That's the point of this comment. It
I
is a bad idea and you will find it very difficult to ever make a game again.
Yeah, and once again, I do think that is might be like an artifact of just like
Oh, I've
how young the games industry is and how tied to the internet it is, where there's a lot of people out there who are like, the only game worth making is like an MMO is the next World of Warcraft, or it's like Dwarf Fortress or something. And it's like Dwarf Fortress took 20 years. All right, it took a long time and
Yeah.
very dedicated effort. And also, those guys are crazy. Are you crazy? Because those guys are crazy.
It's like I think the most recent game that I can think of that like does some of this is which is a game I've never played, but I see lots of people playing, which is Project Zomboid, in early access for 10 years because that's kind of what is required to make a system in which like that type of depth is involved in is decades of work.
Hmm.
Dwarf Fortress takes 20 years because if you want systems that deep, you gotta spend time and, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I watched
It's
a documentary about the Dwarf Fortress guys, the no clip documentary, and they talked about like making game. They made a game before it, and they spent all this time with like doing 3D animation and modeling and stuff, and they were like, that's just really getting in the way of doing everything else, and that's why they decided to go back and do like full ASCII stuff. It's just like everything you do adds exponentially more work.
Mhm. And then, like, your systems start interfering with each other, right?
Hmm.
Like, you know, when you introduce weather, does that affect your ability to keep warm? Then if you have a keep warm system, how does that affect, like, your metabolism? Because you also have a hunger system. And, like, if your metabolism is slower or higher, how does that affect your thirst? And then, like, you start to have intricacies and depth in which, like, no one will ever see, but, like, complicate your life on the back end of just, like, banging your head against the table being like, "Why did I make this?
Yeah.
This is awful for me."
Yeah, the Dwarf Fortress documentary opens up with a story from those guys of they have all of these systems added in, and so it's like they talked about like a funny bug report they had where there was just like a lot of cats getting sick and dying in taverns, and they found out that because of like all of their chained systems, like the cats were entering the tavern, they would get alcohol on their legs and human thinks of. That's not something you write in your waterfall
Mhm.
document and you're just like, yeah, of course, I would never do that. I'm too smart. Um, it takes time, it takes effort, and the more complexity there is, the more that's going to go wrong.
Yeah. Scope. It's hard.
Yeah, I genuinely think
Yeah,
like
and
as much as I like that there's a lot more emphasis on game development and stuff creeping out and people are getting inspired to do that, I don't think there's a lot of good expectations set around what is a single person project, you know? Like is everyone supposed to
mm,
make a platformer? Is everyone supposed to make Breakout? Or are we really setting all these game jam teams to be like, yeah, you made a game in a week and it was terrible. Now it's MMO time. Let's go.
so I have a lot of bad feelings about auteurism because I do not believe that there are auteurs. Um, and for definition's sake, a tour is essentially like the person who can do it all. So like you have this solo developer and like an example of this is like so in games this would be like your Fezzes or Stardew Valleys where like people are like, "Wow, you like made this game like all by yourself." And you're like, "No, they didn't." First of all, Phil Fish had other programmers. There were other people on that team. It's not just made by Phil Fish. Stardew Valley, the guy who made it was supported for 2 years by his
Right.
girlfriend,
Yeah.
like, paying all of their bills, and, like, I think that there's it in, like, all sorts of different artistic mediums, but games has this, like, heavy fixation on this sort of, like, obsession with auteurism, and, like, I think that that's a really dangerous methodology or thought process to put onto the expectation of folks, both, like, when you look at team projects and jam projects, but then, like, these runaway commercially successful projects.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Game design is hard, and I feel like there's, like, a huge gap between both, like, consumer expectations around games, which, like, are wildly disproportionate, often simply misunderstanding game design as, like, a process, which is why I think everyone should make games. If you're listening to this, you're a person who's never made a game, try and make a game. It is incredibly difficult, and, like, on all levels, it is amazing that games get made at all. But because there's this expectation that, like, you have to make it good, and you have to make it good the first time, it's absolutely absurd that games, like, has this idea, because your first game's never gonna be good. Your first 5 are never gonna be good. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
There's not a ton of thought process after that, but, like, game making, hard. Everyone, try and make a game.
Yeah, I mean, so my sort of like thought on this is like this is a very interesting sort of thing that happens where everyone currently in like the cutting edge of technology of the all the jobs being created of like content creators and game developers and like people trying to work in technology, they're all being encouraged to be entirely atomized, where everyone is separate, everyone's doing their own thing. Every streamer has to have their own business, every YouTuber has to be separate, except for tiny little touch points where they get to talk to other people and do a collaboration. But even that's a business deal, you know. It's like there are hardly any
Mhm.
ever people whose startup idea is a team. It's like you do it and then maybe other people will like you. And you know that applies to you know, content creators and developers and, you know, a lot of people. Like even the idea of like a web developer's journey to expertise is to figure it out on their own, do a couple certifications, and maybe get hired somewhere. You know, maybe do freelance for a
Mhm.
while. And that's kind of like a weirdly new thing. And I have to feel like it's probably just like, if not intentional, just a design effect of, you know, how a lot of this stuff came up early. You know, a lot of people don't know that the first Easter egg in a video game was a developer putting in their name and hiding it in the game because they weren't allowed on the credits.
Yeah, I always think about that being such, like, a sad origin story for games.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's, like, many very sad origin stories for games, but, like, also to aggrandize, credit everyone you work with. No
Yeah.
one works alone. None of the things that you make are ever done alone. Just credit people. That don't make them hide their names in secret rooms in your project.
Yeah. Um but yeah, it's like in my brain I can see a very direct line between, you know, no one getting credit for the work that they're doing, and then people think that like everything is done by a single person because their names were scrubbed from
Mhm.
credits, and then now everyone's just doing things on their own and being like, wow, this is hard. How did anyone ever build the entirety of the video game space on their own? And it's like, no one did. They just lied to you.
Yeah. Oh, games. I was trying to think of, like, nope, that gone. I don't know. There's, like, perhaps my feelings against the beginner guide are softening, but, like, I'm always really so fascinated to hear folks' reason for wanting to make games,
Hmm.
because so I did, a critique stream last night with Joel for Work with Indies,
Oh yeah.
and, like, I think that the best thing about games is that they can be extremely healing to make. So, one of the people's games was about, like, neurodivergence and, like, trauma, and so we were having this sort of critique afterwards where it's sort of like, you know, "Do you feel better after making this thing? Like, was this cathartic?" And I think, like, over most other mediums, part of what to me has always been extremely helpful for making games in terms of like working through a process of self-healing is that there's so many things that you can put your hands in. And that's also why I think receiving critique on a game is so much more difficult than anything else. Because, you know, even if you work in a team, even if you don't work in a team, you touch so many things inside of it. Maybe that's the writing or the coding or the art or the music or like the little choices of where the UI goes in ratio to the rest of the screen, where like there's so much that you put into it in the way in which I don't think that I again would make it more similar to comics or even theater, where like as an architect of a world, your relationship with it is so much more complex than it just being, and I mean this in no derogatory sense, a painting or a poem or a sculpture, because you touch a totality over a single expressionary medium. That was a complicated sentence.
That's what we're here for. You know, um, I think it's definitely like one of those things we're still, sort of getting used to. Um, is like how deep can games go? Like this is one of the reasons why I liked the beginner's guide, is because
Mm,
I never viewed it as like espousing like, hey, just everything's bad, give up. I looked at it first and foremost mechanically, because I'm more mechanically minded, being like programmer and
mhm,
IT person. And the idea that somebody could take a game and literally just talk to you through it, literally just like make a quote unquote bad environment and talk to you about a narrative, and that could affect people so strongly, like that is a very good way of making games interactive, making it an experiential thing. It's not like, God of War, where it's like you have the gameplay and then you have a movie, and you kind of switch back and forth
mhm,
between those two. It's an experience, when you are going through it, it means something in the moment, and it means something that you're doing it. um and I think you're right, like that kind of stuff makes it very hard to critique, because it's very different to critique someone who wrote something on a blog somewhere and be like, oh, you misspelled this, but to like stop somebody in the middle of their talking and being like, hey, you're wrong, is like that's a bit more direct, that's a bit harder to deal with.
mhm. I think, like, so I've over the past couple of weeks, not thoughts, though also thoughts, I guess, thought about the term illusory attitude. So this to me is something that I have thought about for like a decade and never really had a term for it. So there's like the worst art term in the entire world, which is embodiment, which is like, you can embody anything. You can see like the embodiment in a painting or like the embodiment of the writer in like the story. And so games has always struggled with this. Game theory, particularly games academia, has always struggled with like naming the way in which people are affected by games that is more poignant or more affecting than other mediums. And so like illusory attitude being this sort of like psychological space that you inhabit. So we have like the magic circle, which my feelings have softened on over time, which is like the social space that one inhabits with others to engage in play. And that's broader than games. So that can be like, you know, ritual or like religious service in this sort of like we have now recreated new rules to engage with within this permeable barrier that folks can enter and exit, but is inherently a sort of like social relationship of space, which kind of addresses the like social aspects in terms of like why we engage in arbitrary rules to like get fulfillment. And then we have illusory attitude, which is the psychological space that an individual needs to be in to engage with that arbitrary rule set and sort of like be willing to existence silliness and play and sort of like I do not mean silliness as in like frivolity, but silliness and sort of like absurdity.
Non-reality.
So, yeah, like games because of illusory attitude, because like one has to first put yourself in a psychological space of being open to arbitrary rule sets and like open to this absurdity allows you to like emotionally and psychologically connect to concepts that like otherwise you might be avoidant of or unwilling to engage in. And I was talking to someone about, is this more effective when the player character is an avatar of you, or is this more effective when the player character is a character? Because I think it's when they're a character, when they have like thoughts and feelings that you must take on to be true for you in sort of like a proprioceptive you, then it is easier for you to take upon the things that the game wants to like quote unquote say to you.
Mhm. I I've been thinking recently about this idea of like there's a lot of people who talk about like Dungeons and Dragons as like therapy, or like tabletop roleplay as like therapy,
Mm,
because there's always like there's sometimes a lot of things that come out that are more impactful to the real person than they are to the character. And I've been thinking about this idea of like storytelling being a part of human culture, and I've just been sort of tossing around in my head. It's like there's an idea of like when you're talking to somebody and you're giving them you're trying to convey something directly to them. This kind of ties into a different idea I had is like, why metaphor? Why use obscurity? Why use any sort of like ambiguity when if the message of the story is don't steal, why does it got to be like and the dragon was slain? It's like you could just be like, hey, don't be greedy. But I think there is something kind of
mhm,
powerful about like if you go up to somebody and you tell them, hey, don't be greedy, they're like, what do you mean? They're going to get defensive. There's a lot of mechanisms there in place to protect yourself. But if you redirect that and you say, hey, you see that guy over there? He's greedy and his life went bad. Then there is sort of a way you can redirect that commentary and make it more easily digestible and acceptable to a person by using a third thing. And I think that's what happens with metaphors. I think that's what happens with art. I think that's what happens a lot, especially with roleplay, because that is once again like that's that avatar where it's like, oh yeah, we're playing, this guy, he does these things and look at the consequences. And then you're not directly criticizing a person, but it's like, I made this thing according to what I think would work and it failed. What does that say?
mhm. Oh, I have a little spinning wheel on this stream. So I think the like chat comment of you get to detach yourself from worldly issue maybes is
Mm,
it like an interesting way of exploring why play is impactful because like so in a sort of spectrum of how play is described both like for humans and non-humans is that like play is an act of rehearsing behaviors. And so if I use the term Nordic LARP, is this a term you are familiar with?
no.
Okay. So Nordic LARP is a style of LARP, LARP being live action role play
Hmm.
that I guess like inherent to the name was developed in like the Nordic countries that is counter to Western style LARPs. So Western style LARPs would have been developed via something like a tabletop role playing game, D&D, in which you have, you know, characters that follow along in that sort of like medieval fantasy-esque long-term storytelling methodology. Nordic LARP is a little bit, I don't mean this again in a derogatory sense, but like a little bit more serious. The like interactions that it's interested in exploring are much more encapsulated in a like, what if we did the Stanley Prison Experiment, but as a LARP, which is a real freaking LARP that happened. It's called Capo, and it was absurd. Where like there's a whole book about it. It's fucking wild, but like one of the concepts within, and this extends like to tabletop role playing as well, is the concept of bleed, where the aspects of your play become so real that they start to affect you outside of the play space and can like be transformative for better or for worse. So in this sort of example of Capo, it recreated the same, which we're not even going to touch on the
Yeah, there's a lot of
Stanley
stuff
prison
there.
experiments. Like, yeah, but what it was is that it was a bunch of people who were like, after this game was done, they did all of these interviews where they're like, I didn't think that I could be so cruel, that I could be so terrible as to hurt people in the ways that I did over the course of this weekend. And so, like, for better or for worse, this like rehearsal behavior that was they were engaging with in play taught themselves something deeply disturbing about themselves. And it could have also taught something beautiful about themselves. I don't know. The interviews largely focus on everyone being like, maybe we shouldn't have role played the Stanley Prison Experiment. We all need to maybe go sit down and have another thought. Um, but like it does, I think that that's what I find so fascinating about games is that, like, it opens this door to self-exploration without having to engage in certain activities, and I think, like, when I was talking to folks about Illusory Attitude, we were talking about, like, why can you commit horrible crimes in a game and not feel bad? Because some people can. Some people can, some people can't.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean,
And, like, yeah, I don't know.
yeah, I think it's always like I think a lot of that has to do with the sort of allowance of the designer and sort of what they do. Something I always thought was really funny to point out to the people I know who played Baldur's Gate is they're like, "Oh, I'm going to do a good run. I'm going to do all the good options and stuff." And I'm like, "But you're still going to loot every single house you come across, right? Like you're going to steal all their stuff.
Mhm.
You're just going to take gold that's out in the open and be like, "That's mine." Um and so there is something to be said about that, like the expectations set up by the world, they can, people talk about like the suspension of disbelief and the rules of the world as they're introduced. It definitely can include morals, like the make believe
Mhm.
sense doesn't stop at just like I'm a tiefling, I'm running around, I'm red and I got horns. It's like you could definitely be like, yeah, in this world no one thinks stealing is bad, unless they catch you. That is the as defined consequences of the world, and you know there isn't any morality behind it. There is sort of nothing there to suspend your disbelief that these people are going to turn around and be like, oh no, you just stole my mortgage payment. um so there is sort of an interesting thing where a lot of these
People
games
give you
are.
bad reviews for that too.
What was that?
People would give you bad reviews if you did that too. They'd be like, "I feel you made it really boring because I couldn't loot everything, and that person said I stole their mortgage payment, and that
Yeah,
means this game is bad." You're
yeah.
like, "Eh." So, a term that we had used at work around this sort of like, oh, there's like multiple thoughts that I'm having right now. But so the term games literacy, I think, is like an important aspect of discussing what games become in this sort of like, you know, uh, renaissance. I don't know. That is like kind of happening with everyone starting to like get into making games is that it requires a high amount of literacy in games. So I do not know where in gaming experience you were as a child, but like a controller for the period of like when 3D became a thing had no rules. Like we'd suddenly gone from like 2 buttons to like 18 buttons.
Hmm.
Not that many on the original controllers, but so no one knew what these buttons meant. Like, which I also learned in like the process of researching this, that the PlayStation buttons mean something. They like had an intention. Um, which is map, menu, accept, and decline.
Oh, like they
But
wanted each button to be something specific, not reboundable.
yeah, so like circle is accept, X is decline, square is map, and triangle is menu. Um, because you look up. Anyways, but like So everyone was just like, I don't know, buttons mean things. And so like each game you would play would just be different buttons and like would just be nonsense. And then slowly over time developed into a literacy where like X means this, triangle means this, right and left triggers mean this, and these analog sticks mean this. Where when you're making something that inherently requires that high level of literacy, that is sort of where like a lot of the experimental play happens, but it also locks out people who could ever access that because they don't understand how to interact with it.
Yeah,
And I mean in like a very physical sense.
it is one of those things that it's hard to understand because there's not a lot of cross between the barrier of people who know games and grew up with them and people who want to, there was this video that I saw that was really fun, which is just somebody had their partner go through games and play their favorite games when their partner had never played games before, and there was this really striking moment of them playing Portal and walking around, and like the tutorial pops up on the side that's like WASD to move, so they figured that out. It never said to move the mouse, to move the camera. So they spent quite a while just walking, staring straight ahead, trying to do the puzzles without moving their head at all. So it's like, those are very similar things where it's like you don't realize how much knowledge is just carried over.
Yeah. And I think it's like an incredibly difficult hurdle. I think that is the hurdle for games as a medium. In terms of like, that is what makes it difficult for it to take on wider spread adoption. I don't really know like what words I want to use for that. But then like it inherently feels like this like secret medium for a lot of people who are just like, I don't know, video games.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to video games.
Yeah.
But then also the general sense of who plays video games also makes lots of you're like, I thought it was just shooting things and everyone yelled at me when I tried.
Yeah, and it's like, I think that's one of the faults of the gaming industry, is that they have decided to optimize high retention of like cult fan bases. Like the people who play Call of Duty play every Call of Duty. There's very few people who jump in and out, even to the point where it's like now people are doing like fan fiction about the characters and stuff. Like a lot of these newer games are designed to have hooks and like gambling mechanics for kids and stuff like that. Like it's all about grabbing the people who are there and just keeping them there. But there is definitely a lot of stuff where it's like there's a broader audience and it's just not really being catered to. I think the success of like quote unquote cozy games is a very good example of that, of like there's a large untapped market of people who played Animal Crossing when COVID started, and then just like that was their only real introduction to games because that was what catered to them, and it just happened to line up with a world event.
So this is a fascinating question to me all the time to ask people. What was the game that you played that made you realize that games could be more? More anything, just more.
So when I was young, I played games with my brother, and I did the little brother thing of just like, yeah, he's doing it. And I remember a lot of those experiences just kind of like, there was a certain point where it's like they were just nostalgic for me, and I liked that. And then I went back to those games. I downloaded an emulator, I figured that all out, and I played those games. And I remembered playing, there are two that stick out in my head, and that one is Majora's Mask, because I played all of the Zelda games with my brother, and he did most of the stuff, and so it was like whatever. And then I went back to this game and I was like, when I had more of a critical brain, I was like, oh, this is smart, this is interesting, you know, having this design layout of 4 different areas of like all the different capabilities of the masks and stuff. And I was like, it's very interesting to be moving inside this, you know, clock town. This, everything's moving on a schedule. And I became fascinated with it. I became interested in it on my own. And so that to me was like, games could be an interesting sense to explore. You know, I had played like other games and stuff and I'd gotten good at them, and it was like, you know, something to do as a pastime. But that was the first time I remember coming back to a game and being like, oh, this is interesting to me. And then the other game that comes to mind is Final Fantasy IX, which is the only Final Fantasy I have played because once again I was young and found I found a emulator, and that was like one of the top downloaded things. So I was like, cool, I'll try it. And that was a game where I just like, it just kept going and it kept expanding and it kept having that sense of like, there's more stuff around the corner. And so these 2 games I think really sparked my interest in like games as adventures, as some, you know, there's things out there that are not expected, and that is interesting to me as the discovery part of it. And I'm still a lot like that, where I heavily gravitate towards things where it's like, if you can put out things out there that I don't expect, that's what interests me. I'm not worried about becoming like the best at Fortnite or like, you know, trying to build a house in The Sims. I want to see new things, you know?
So fascinating to me because I have never modded anything in like any real amount, and I feel like there's lots of folks who are like, I got into game design because of modding, and I'm like, fascinating. What is that like? Like, I don't know. Like modding and emulation are just very deeply interesting facets of game development and design that are something I don't know much about.
Yeah. For anyone listening who has a 3DS, so something interesting is that the 3DS is a console that has a lot of interesting capabilities in it. The shop for it, the eShop, has, I believe, been shut down recently. I don't know. It's either coming soon or shut down recently. So the modding scene there and the emulation scene there has gone crazy. The 3DS has in it a virtual console for DS and Game Boy games, and they also have, you know, it has a lot of other capabilities and stuff, but the main thing is just that like there's a whole selection of games that you can't really experience as they're meant to, because the 3DS is a unique piece of hardware. It has 2 screens. There's not a lot of other things that emulate that. And the emulation people have done crazy amounts of work where it's super easy to get all of this stuff. There's QR codes that you scan with the camera on the device, and it just does a lot of that stuff automatically because people have written scripts. I think it's a really cool community project to make use of a console that is dead now and to actually, you know, give access to these things in the way that they were intended.
I feel like archivism is such a fascinating topic in game design that
Mm-hmm.
like we can't do it. Um, Not that like it is impossible. Though actually no, I revoke
I
that.
would say it's
It is
impossible.
impossible. Yeah. And that like that is something that is so tragic about games. I mean, like it happens to all things, but a like old roommate of mine is very into game archivism, and it's just always really fascinating to hear him talk about it because he got like really deep into ROM dumping.
Hmm.
You can just like buy ROMs that no one has ever opened, just like from warehouses, from studios that closed,
Hmm.
and then dump them and be like, "Did I find a cool thing?" Like Gashapon for extremely nerdy video game people.
Yeah, real life gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah, no, it's I have a lot to say about how much copyright has harmed a lot of this stuff. Um,
Everyone go make Steamboat Willie games. Take back Steamboat Willie.
yeah.
He's of the people now.
There's one story I like to tell to just show how messed up some of this stuff is with copyright is that Bandai Namco actually copyrighted. I think it was Bandai Namco. They copyrighted mini games in loading screens, which is a large thing. I remember they used to be in old like Dragon Ball Z games, and that copyright expired, but no one does it anymore because the time in which that was popular, they couldn't, and they were afraid of lawsuits. So that practice just died out, and it's not even because copyright is enforced now, it's because it was enforced ever.
Sorry, I'm banning a random person as a moderator. For spamming work channels with bad scammy stuff.
That's fine.
So I lost the train of thought at the end there.
Oh, that's good.
So I do want to talk about a project that I find deeply interesting.
Do it.
So Pablo. What is Pablo's last name? I feel like Pedersini is like, so the reason I ask about everyone's like weird favorite games is, so mine, that was like the one that I was like, oh, the games can be more than just this, is Every Day the Same Dream, which is made by Pablo. And so I've been fascinated by Pablo's work for many, many years. And he made a like online system for hanging out, which I found super fascinating, which was Like, which was based off of the Like gallery that I think he founded. Which is just one of those things where, I don't know, it was like the first time that I saw someone making stuff and I was like, doing weird things.
There are certain people, when you just talk about the things that they've done, I feel like there needs to be like an asterisk on screen. You do not judge your own work based off of the amount that this person has done.
I made this like, is it here? No. Dun, dun, dun. Here we go. So we had, during lockdown, when I was doing festivals for work, we obviously could not have a festival. And we had been running 3 festivals a year for different games. And we were like, that's too many festivals a year to run in lockdown. So we will run one festival. And used Like to make it. And it was like a deeply fascinating, like, you know, when you play a choose your own adventure game that's made by like one writer, and like all of the solutions make absolutely no sense except for the person who made it. So you're like, instead of having to try and logic my way through this, have to like figure out what to do based off of what I think this person. Oh yeah, my username is all already taken. So like everyone, this is like a multiplayer game that like that Pablo just like made an architecture for. And I don't know, it's deeply fascinating. So I made all of this weird art and you can explore this festival that we made.
I really like your
like
art
a
as
meta
somebody
game happening.
as somebody who is artistically challenged. Physically, I do like your art.
Thank you. Yeah, there's like a whole quest line, secrets, and also lots of games. I think we had 50 games, and We paid 16 people in partners of 2, so 8 to make new games as part of the festival.
That's
Thanks,
cool.
Canada Council. I am, I guess, legally obligated to say thank you.
So,
That's what it says above the doors.
so I'm curious, is this like just run on a server? Like,
Yeah. So it's run on Glitch .me, which is like a web hosting service for like websites or small projects.
okay. Yeah, I always get too deep in the weeds and stuff. I do network engineering as for my work, so
Yeah. Anyways, the thing I'm proud of. Make weird, random stuff, everyone.
yeah, I mean, like, this is one of the things we were talking about, is like, if you are a solo developer, this is much closer to the goal that you would be expecting, you know, versus like a lot of the typical games out there. If you're somebody who's just starting out, this is great, you know. This is more what people should be shooting for, instead of trying everything into the metaverse or something, whatever the kids are into
And
nowadays.
this is like, this is fully someone else's engine. And also, this is free and open. Download this and look at its code. You can fully see everything that we did.
What was it written
Because
in?
we had inherited JavaScript, I want to say.
Okay.
But I was largely doing the art and hooking up of everything, and a like coworker was doing largely the like networking, and then Jay, who was part of, I think had advised Biome Collective, who also used this system in their own work to do their own festival, sort of connected us to like ask Jay about things, because it again is like clearly made by one person's brain. So like all of these like random arts people are all trying to figure out how to create stuff inside this like architecture
Before
that
we
this
start-
one guy made. Yeah, this is one of the games that folks made. So yeah, it was a deeply fascinating project. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Something I think you would enjoy seeing is this guy does video essays, and he did one on games that aren't games, and he talks a lot about some of these like interactive art exhibit things that people have made. And there was one that was like, yeah, I think it's this one, but it's like a whole thing, and it was done by someone like an important, like, famous band. I'm very bad at pop culture stuff, so I don't remember what, but
Are you thinking of Kentucky Route Zero?
no, it is
Because that was made by a band, to my understanding.
no, so it's an exclusive Radiohead virtual exhibit. It wasn't made by Radiohead, but I think it was made for Radiohead. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff here. So yeah, this is a Radiohead like sort of like online exhibit thing that they did, which is crazy cool.
I feel like someone that I find deeply fascinating as both an auxiliary game designer, but also not quite a game designer, is Paloma Dawkins, who has made many video games, but also does like films and comics and animation. We'll put Paloma's website in the chat. But yeah, there's like, I think a lot of really fascinating things that come out of like a driving force of like a singular design perspective, in the same way that like, you know, there are directors who have like visions, and this is my sort of like anger about the, but like the director doesn't do everything, but you can see the like nuance of their work grow over time.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like Paloma has a bunch of that, which is like Paloma's work is very Paloma across the board.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about like there it's very good to work and collaborate with people, but having a centralized vision for a specific project can produce a lot of really good stuff, and that's how a lot of people, have done things. Is people have their own style, and even though the work can be collaborative, the vision can be centered on a single person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is one of the things that games also does really bad about talking about, is that design is its own thing. It is not just like like design, and I think like dialogue are one of those things where people are just like, yeah, whatever, it's part of the work. And it's like, no, those are their own jobs. If you're a programmer and a writer and a
Mm-hmm.
designer, that's 3 jobs, and that's a lot, and it would be better suited to have people who are actually interested in those be their own people. To have to be bogged down with learning to program if you just want to design systems is, rough.
I do think games definitely suffers in that regard. Not a Each aspect of the design and creation of a game is equally difficult and vital to the end product.
Yeah. And yeah, that's whether that was done intentionally or not it's just like we gotta figure something
not attribute
out.
to malice what can be attributed to ignorance. One of those things that like everyone wants to believe that the thing that they do is the most important thing, because that's a very like ego driven way of one's own work. And I think that's just like one of those things that is difficult for everyone, regardless of like whether or not it's something you work on or is understood consciously by you. It's just a hard thing to not be
Yeah.
like, no, I am the one who works hardest. I am the one who holds the team together. I am the one who does this. You're like, no, everyone's doing their part. Unless they're not, in which case, hopefully
Yeah.
they work harder on being part of the team.
I wouldn't say everyone wants to. I think that's like a bit of an overly cynical thing. I just think there's a lot of biases that people are unaware about themselves, as in the nature of biases, like you're experienced in the depth of the things that you do. I do not know how much work it takes to do art. I don't do, traditional art. I don't do drawings and stuff. I'm terrible at them. So I'm never going to know the intricacies of there. That doesn't mean I just assume it's 0, right? Like if I ask somebody to draw something, I'm not like, come on, 30 seconds have passed, I know how much work my work takes, and you can easily assume the work of others, but you just got to understand where your inaccuracies are. And I think a lot of people sometimes overinflate that, how much work it takes on certain things. I think sort of like the inverse of this thing is that like, since video games originated in the tech industry, there is a lot of, for lack of a better word, disrespect or like minimizing of other fields of like art and design and stuff like that. But there's also an overinflation of programming, and it's like there's a lot of stuff that can be done simply and easily, but it's kind of like this look down your nose, that's not the right way to do it. And I think a lot of people overinflate how difficult coding is because of that. Coding can just as easily be, the terrible like giant if else statements of Undertale of somebody who was a musician and didn't know how to code, and that, guess what, made a game that sold really well. It still works. The shipped is the best feature. There are so many people who get bogged down constantly with trying to do the next coolest thing, trying to build their website with a different package and backend and a different tech stack and and it's like, if you want to be a technical person, be an engine developer. Then you can focus on the cutting edge of everything. You can get the best physics engine. You can look at the best new algorithms, blah, blah, blah. If you want to make a game, coding is one piece of the puzzle, and it's not as hard as you think. And the people who tell you that are probably inflating themselves a bit.
It is probably one of my deepest frustrations, and what has always held me back from becoming better at coding is every time not every time. I've known many a nice programmer. When you're like, I don't understand why this code isn't working. And someone's like, I rewrote your entire code. And you're like, that does not answer my question. I didn't understand why I couldn't use the greater than sign in this context. Now I understand nothing of what this new code does.
Yeah.
But you did just spend the past 3 hours telling me I know nothing. Um, and that's always deeply frustrating about, and like that is true in every discipline. You will find those people.
Yeah.
Um, but it
Uh,
is a like annoying hitch for programming that that's often I think like the way that people respond.
yeah. It's unfortunate because, you know, there are always going to be those people in their disciplines. Unfortunately, we are in their territory. You know, the internet is
Yeah.
run by tech companies, and those are where those people come from. You know, so it's just kind of an unfortunate byproduct of this stuff. You know.
So what is it? So one of the things that I find, as much as I love Discord to be so deeply frustrating about Discord, is that it replaced forums where like I can go on Stack Exchange and I can read documentation on the Unity engine for the past decade and be like, yes, maybe this will help, and like create a much more informed opinion about like what my problem is before I reach out to someone and I'm like, hey, I actually don't understand this.
Hmm.
But with Discord, very few people maintain a like FAQ or forum in which people can ask these types of things publicly. So instead you have to join a quiz. It's such like a basic question. Like everyone comes in and like asks this question and you're like, "Really? Maybe if there is some sort of publicly available version of this where I could just know the answer, I wouldn't have to come in here and ask you
You know, I'm
because you're setting
very
up multiple
tired of
barriers."
I'm so tired of all of these babies asking me, "Oh, how do I walk? How do I walk?" And we've learned how to walk. Just figure it out. We've all done it, okay?
Get good. No, it's
Yeah,
one of my least favorite things about tech.
yeah, and that's a very weird thing that has been done where it's like the internet has had such a rapid expanse, and for some reason in the last like 10 years or something, people have just decided that like we can't keep the old stuff around. Like it's this weird like forced scarcity problem of like people come up with a better solution and then stop they just stop doing anything with the old solution, and then that's it.
Mhm.
They put it out back and they put it to pasture, and they're like, now it's the new thing. And so it's this weird like hamster wheel of people constantly trying to get on the newest technology and, you know, deprecating the old ones. And it's like they could still exist, they could both be there.
I think like there's so when I learned about like I find speedrunning, I've never ran anything because it seems hard. Seems like a lot of practice and I'm not really that interested in it, but I do find it fascinating. Uh like arbitrary code execution in speedrunning. If I
Right.
say is this something that you're familiar with?
Yes.
Okay. So
The
there's
Paper
like
Mario
GDQ
speed run.
run. Yeah. There's a GDQ run of like uh Ocarina of Time
Hmm.
where they sort of like go through and they're like, well, like we like rebuilt this um the like beta version of the game. So there's like a bunch of assets in here and like the original storylines and we'll be doing all of this and sort of like connecting it all together. And well that it's called Triforce percent, in which like originally the um like trailer of the game showed you like getting the Triforce from a chest, essentially.
Hmm.
And so they reach that point of the game and they're like, oh, also, by the way, this isn't the beta version that we've uncovered. We have like fully recoded the game via arbitrary code execution. And there's this ending sequence in which they've fully recreated, not re, they have fully newly created a with dynamic wind physics and like updated models for both Zelda and Link in their Breath of the Wild sort of like versions. and, like, Twitch chat is, like, all across the sky, and that, like, this is original hardware. This is, like, arbitrary code execution that has reprogrammed this N64 cartridge to be able to do these things. And, like, we so quickly move past, as you were saying, like, the existence of technology to just be like, "Eh, it's been a couple of years, so it's like, it doesn't matter anymore." That, like, there's so much deep creativity that comes from a box to, like, keep throwing out the box and being like, "Let's just keep making bigger boxes." You're
Mhm.
like, "But that will make it so much harder for people to make cool things because 'cause they're gonna be like, 'Oh, I guess I can just do whatever.'"
Yeah. There's a streamer I follow on here. His name's, I think, Spiridon. And he's working
Mhm.
on making a game, but he's really trying to make the back end as like efficient, close to metal as possible. He's using WebAssembly and Zig and all that. And I was in his chat and I was talking about stuff because I also dislike this just like giant bloat. Another thing I have against Baldur's Gate 3, but this
Mm.
giant bloat that goes on where it's like, back in the day of like the original Pokemon, you had like Pokemon, the first generation was like, red and blue and all that, technically green, I think. And that game is so tightly packed. If you ever watch anyone do speedruns on it, they will use their glitches are basically just like accessing bits of code that they're not supposed to. They're just like kind of pointing at random spots, but that game is so packed that there's not exactly like a piece of code you could point to that's blank. A lot of the stuff is there. So it's like if you go into the bag and you just like go toward like one past potions, it's like, oh, there's a sign because we had to use that space. And then when it comes to the second generation of like gold and silver, they had improved their technology so much and become so much more efficient with it that they actually made it so that the post game of the second generation is you just go back and play the first generation. The entire map, all the trainers, all the Pokemon are there. And it's like
Maps aren't the same.
the maps aren't the
They
same.
are not as big. No.
Oh.
Sorry, I know so much about the original Pokemon first 2
That's
games.
I'm
So this
very
is
happy
not
to
to
be
be like,
corrected.
"You are fully wrong." Um, one of my favorite Pokemon, like, first generation facts in terms of, like, speaking directly to how small they are, a modern JPEG has more data than the
Hmm.
original Pokemon games.
Right, yeah.
Fully. The entire game. Like, most JPEGs, just bigger. Just lar we're like, there's a really great video that someone did where, like, so the missing no glitch, right?
Hmm.
If I say missing no glitch, you know what this is.
Yes.
Okay. Um, like, how that glitch visually comes to look like that is, like, this entire it's like a 40-minute video of the person discussing the, like, different compression algorithms that they use to try and get everything as small as possible. Um, where it's like an overflow issue essentially, where there were meant to be more Pokemon in the Pokédex, and so when that data is pulled, if it pulls something that is not actually visual data, it is just trying to write code as visual data, and it causes an overflow issue, which is why the missing no sprite looks like that,
Hmm.
because it is already gone through its sort of like caching and uncaching a certain amount of that data. Um, and it's just like it's one of those things that there's I think a few jams that have done this. Ian Bogus, what is this author's name? Has a game that like there was like an Atari jam and it's about the seasons, but like I think it's really fascinating both as someone who like never programmed or really necessarily like thinks about how efficient something needs to be because I live in a time in which like efficiency is not mandatory for the creation of a game,
Hmm.
to look at something like that and be like, y'all really like had nothing to work with. Like You're just, like, moving around data packages as best as you can to be far enough away that hopefully it doesn't corrupt your game. Like,
Yeah.
because then otherwise you just, like, accidentally physically interact with them, and it messes up your game. It's fascinating.
Yeah, there's a lot of really fun stuff like that in old games. The original Kirby, I watched the director actually has a YouTube channel and he talks about a lot of stuff like that. And, name's Masahiro Sakurai, and he's done a lot of
Mhm.
stuff with Nintendo, and he made the Kirby franchise. And he was talking about how in his original game, like you have Kirby here, and he just like runs around and he collides with the environment. He jumps around and jumps up and down and does that stuff. The enemies don't have any collision. The enemies have a set path that they walk on, and they just made it directly above where the platforms are. So if you take away the platforms, they're going to do the same thing, but they're just pretending to walk.
But there's no point of them having collision.
Yeah,
That's the thing.
there's
There's no requirement for them to have collision, so why add it?
yeah. There's a lot of really fun stuff that he talks about like making the Kirby sprite and how they had to pack that data. He's a circle, but they had to like make that stuff very small. So there's like he's split into like half, and then they mirror the images when he goes back and forth. But they'll use like pieces of him for other things. Like there's this boss that's a tree, and he has just like a very simple face of like two little eyes like this and then a mouth, and I think those are retextured, like that's like Kirby's feet or something. I can't remember what it is, but it's like they pulled stuff from Kirby and like stretched him out and made it into the guy's face, because they needed to save the space.
Yeah. It's games are cool. I love them. They're
Yeah.
so weird.
um a lot of the original games too, like making the stuff wasn't easy. It wasn't like you could just like for example, like music, you couldn't just go into a program and just be like, oh, I'm gonna download this file and put it in there. A lot of that stuff people were still figuring out how to do. So the original Donkey Kong Country music was hand coded by Frequency. That's how they designed the music.
That's why would yeah.
And there's videos of them like using the device, like I think it was the Famicom or whatever, but they have like a little mouse thing going up and down and like inputting the numbers on the screen. It's crazy.
I like think about analog processes for games a lot, and I find it deeply fascinating. One of the things that I find saddest about the 21st century is the fact that we stopped having so much analog electronics. Um, Everything's a chip now, and that makes me sad because you can't mess with it.
Yeah.
There's like no, it's just all on a chip, and it's nothing you could do except for break them.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of stuff there about like control over devices and right to repair and ugh.
Yeah, because I think like in terms of how I think that thought is reflected in my feelings about games. I think about like, yeah, like having to fine tune frequencies by hand or like when, they're making these 3D renders for Donkey Kong Country, for example. Like you have to compromise some amount of fidelity for creativity in a like it's good enough now kind of way. Like, does the smudge on the paper matter after 80 hours of the drawing? Do you
Mm-hmm.
start the drawing over again or accept that it has to be done? And like those imperfections are kind of like my favorite thing about just like everything. And I think that's why like the original Pokemon games are so fascinating to me. Um in that like there's just so many messy imperfections and it's beautiful because of those.
Yeah.
Like is the game very good? No. It's completely middle of the road in terms of, like, an RPG.
Yeah.
Was it revolutionary? Sure, but, like, in the same way I was listening to someone talk about, like, is there a games canon? So canon here being, like, is there a subset of games, like, everyone must play to understand games? And the problem with the canon is that it will always be bad. Not because those works weren't important, but, like, the Mona Lisa. Sure, everyone and their mom has, like, heard of the Mona Lisa. Everyone talks about it. They're like, "Oh, what a beautiful and revolutionary painting." It's, like, tiny and boring
Yeah.
because the idea of it inside of your head is far more grandialized than its reality. So, like, sure, is Ocarina of Time a good game? Yeah, it was important, but, like, playing it now, you're unless you're riding on nostalgia, it's just fine.
Yeah.
Kind of
Um,
boring and long. It's like
yeah.
watching an old movie where you're like, "We have come so far in editing." Like,
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely like, the those things were impressive for their time, but they've become integrated in
mhm,
society into a way where it's like, yeah, the Mona Lisa is not important because we know how light works now. you know, like that's one of the reasons why that stuff was important was because like Leonardo da Vinci was crazy and he was researching how light works before people really knew about it, and it helped make a more realistic painting. And now it's like, yeah, we know, we got it.
the Mona Lisa used to have eyebrows. I'm just gonna say it.
Do it. What? Tell me the weird
She used to
facts.
have eyebrows, and so one of the reasons archivists, when it comes to artistic works, have never really been able to do any work on any of Da Vinci's paintings, um, because he was so experimental in how he used pigments. So the Mona Lisa is, like, extremely thin layers of varnish work where no one knows what the formula was that he had made to do that. They tried to clean the Mona Lisa, they erased her eyebrows. That's why she has no eyebrow.
No.
It's not like some big artistic choice that was made, it was just, like, literally people were like, "How do we preserve this work? I guess we'll try," and they erased her eyebrows, and they were like, "Okay, I guess we'll never clean it again."
hmm there's a video by that guy that I linked earlier. But in that video, they talk about this painting that was made, and it's one of those like very like more avant-garde paintings, and it was like red, blue, and yellow. I think it was like either that was
Mhm.
the name of it or it was just the color of it, but it just had like a couple swatches of different colors in like a very boxy format, and people got mad at it because people are weird about absurdism and stuff like that, and anything having meaning beyond what it looks like. And so someone cut it up with a box cutter, and so they had to go back in to rework on the painting. And these people were so mad because they were like, this isn't art, this isn't impressive, I could do this. And I think always find it so funny, they had a really hard time trying to find the right red to replace it with. Like they couldn't figure out the
Oh,
correct
man.
pigmentation of it.
So, there's a really famous example of, like, art activism fuck ups. So, there was a painting that was just blue. It was just the color blue, and it needed to, like, be had work have work done on it, essentially, it needed to be cleaned. Um, and so they sent it off to this guy, and they received it back, and he had fully just painted over it with, like, a different blue. And they were like, "What like, what is this?" He's like, "Oh, I fixed it." Um, where, like I feel like the thing about I have the same feeling with games, and that's because I do believe that games are art and will defend that position until the end of time. Like, when folks are like, "Ah, that painting is, like, so bad," and, like, you paint it, I don't know. You you don't like how that painting's painted, paint your own painting. Like,
Yeah.
there's something I think that it's something that I wish that I could convey to people about art is that, like, art really isn't important because of the end product. Art is important because of the process that you experience and the things that you learn about yourself as a person while you do it. And so, like, yeah, paint the blue painting. sit there and paint a canvas of only blue because, like, the arbitrariness and the interaction with process that you have as someone who is creating something is the important part. Like, people can think that the thing that you make afterwards is, like, cool, um, but it's, like, that moment that I think is really important. And this is, like, I'll touch upon the, like, touchy subject, but this is what makes me sad about AI. It doesn't necessarily make me mad in many regards, because, like, realistically, I'm technology agnostic. A learned language model is a cool thing, but it makes me sad when people are like, "Well, no, like, anyone can do art." And you're like, "You could always do art." Like, I don't understand why you feel that the only way that you could have made art was by removing yourself from the equation, because that's what makes art, is that you are part of it. And I'm like, "Please, just, like, go draw a tree. Make a silly stick figure comic." Like, I don't know. That is what makes me sad about AI.
Yeah, there's a few things that make me sad about AI. I agree this idea that like the goal is not to be a creator, it's to be a manager of something creative is kind of weird. And it's this weird idea
Mhm.
that's been put upon by like everything has to be for a monetary purpose. It's like people doing things on their own is considered a waste. And that's a weird perspective to have as a society of individual people. It's like it's a very gross attitude to have towards creation, is that like if you don't do it right the first time, you're worthless, and it's terrible. Another thing that makes me sad is it just really shows a lot of the terrible work that we have done as a society educating people about technology. I always say that people use the word
Mhm.
AI the same way they use the word magic, and that's
Yeah.
because AI means anything. AI is the one of the broadest terms. It's like IT, information technology. That's an abacus. An abacus is IT, if you want to get technical. But it's just like people don't understand large language models. People don't understand neural networks and back propagation of what is essentially mathematics. And so they think it's magic. They think it's crazy. Just like when people first saw voice recognition in software, they thought it was crazy. And that technical illiteracy is really hurting people because they don't understand what's happening. They're doing a little flourish and a magic trick and being like, "We didn't steal anything. I made this with magic." And that is really hurting the
Magic
industry.
can hurt people.
Magic is lying with a little bit of a twist, it's there's
It
plenty of
is.
places where it's useful. Every game is based on a lie. Every sort of interaction in fantasy is a suspension of disbelief. It's a willingness to participate in an illusion. But there's an agreement that you're not going to steal my credit card when I play your video game, like
It
um
says you.
I
I'm here to
assume
steal your
that.
credit card in your video game.
I assume that. Maybe that's my fault. Maybe I am the one who is uneducated, but um
So, I fully agree with this sentiment. I've tried to talk to a lot of people about, like, the de-radicalization work that needs to happen around, like, how particularly folks who aren't media literate. I will never forgive reality to the fact that I was always told that I could not use, like, Wikipedia as a source because
yeah.
that wasn't real research when I was a kid, and now I have to have conversations with people where I'm like, "Jeff Bezos is not downloading 5G NFC chips into your brain via the COVID vaccine. Why is that a thing you think? You just read that on the internet. The internet lies to you. We've been through this." Like, but, there are 2 groups of people, or 2 types of people, I guess, that I think will actually get to artificial intelligence. The first of which is Steve Grand, who is a very strange game designer who is, like, I guess, like, a biochemical engineer who made the game Creatures, which is, like, a, like, life simulation game in which, like, you don't actually control anything. There's, like, these little creatures that walk around that, like, learn via you through, like, positive and negative reinforcement, but it is not like a very simple calculation. There's like hormones being transported in their brains that like give them positive and negative experiences based off of their genetic qualities. It's wild. And he is obsessed with the idea of creating a digital creature that dreams. And people who really intimately like robots, those are the two groups that will get to artificial intelligence before anyone else.
Yeah, I really like generative algorithms and reinforcement learning and that stuff. Like the thing I always tend back to in my brain of like making games and stuff is like I really like the idea of making an ecosystem and then having you play in that.
Mm.
This idea of like walking up and then like you buy everything off a trader and then you go to sleep and you come back and he has the exact same stuff. I'm like, no. Let's have actual trading. That would be cool. That's the kind of stuff that I get really into, but you know, there is a lot of genuinely interesting stuff there for AI to do. You know, the same things that are being used to like, you know, steal people's stuff. Like you could definitely see a lot of really interesting ways of implementing them in, you know, with actual like consent and knowledge. You know, there's the idea in video games of an overseer AI, where sometimes in games they have something else that's hidden off screen, kind of telling the enemies like, hey, don't crowd the guy too much, you know, maybe that will break the power fantasy. And it's like you could have a really cool adaptive overseer AI that uses the reinforcement of like, hey, did you walk into a fight and then immediately get killed without a chance to do anything? Well, let's make the enemies easier, you know, let's try to give them more space and stuff. I think there's a lot of really cool usages there, but that's not what makes people quick money.
Yeah. Damn that quick money. If only we could all have quick money to make the games that we want instead of commercially viable games.
Yeah, I've seen some people talk about this interesting idea of like there has been a loss of an artisan class of like there, you know, back in the olden days of a lot of the European civilizations and you know just a lot of the earlier civilizations, like there were classes of people that were designed towards your job is to make things. You know, it doesn't really necessarily matter if it's more efficient, if it's like crazy, you know, like you think about stuff like furniture. Most furniture that is sold nowadays is terrible quality and terrible looking because it's designed to be easy to manufacture. In which case they succeed, you know, congratulations, you've made a cheap wooden box that I can sit on. But there's a lot of furniture that was made prior that was specifically people like there were, you know, upholsterers and woodcrafters and stuff like that who wanted to make quality, interesting goods. And that was a whole thing. And it's just kind of getting eaten up by this rapid manufacturing, constantly, you know, just need something to sit on kind of deal. As you can tell, I don't have a good phrase for that.
No, I think like there is I think one of the things that is difficult about a hyper capitalist society is that like the desire for individualistic taste for beauty is really diminished where like when everything that you consume is a large manufactured good. Like, you know, every table that you can buy is the same table a million times. Crow into your own little nest. And by that I mean like corvid crow
Mm-hmm.
is always going to be the same. Like you don't necessarily get in that way in which everything would have previously been bespoke, where you would go to, you know, the folks in your town who made furniture and be like, I need a table. I want the table to look like this. There's a collapsing of aesthetic identity that I think a lot of people struggle with, and a way that I think like capitalism makes lots of people struggle with a lot of different aspects of identity because of the sort of siphoning off to homogenize people. Um, that like I think is very I think just kind of comes back to the thing that I find most interesting being the imperfections. Like, if you went out and you were like, "I want a, carpet," you could choose the colors and all of these things and, like, have something that was made by a person who has done this for their entire life or is currently being trained to do it for their entire life, who's extremely skilled in the, like, craftsmanship of the thing that you're asking of them. Instead, you can get a $20 rug off Amazon, next day delivery.
Yeah.
But it's not a better rug, it's just a faster one.
Yeah. I I saw somebody say something once that I thought was a very fun and like impactful statement, which is like the things that were made were never remembered for their perfections. You know, nobody sits there and tries to make things look perfect. What they do is they add a film grain over it. They get the little static that, from like VHS tapes and stuff. They, look at the different histories of things. People love seeing things restored, but there's also a lot of idea of like we miss the imperfections of things. The different things that made those mediums specific. People still have a fondness for black and white and like the different weird artifacts that comes with burning things into real film. And those are the things that we keep coming back to. It's not like we just take all of those old movies and scrub them and just be like, good, we're done with that. People miss the consequences of reality.
I have 2 thoughts about this. The first one is, it made me so sad. I saw someone on Twitter, I guess, like, probably a year or more ago, who is like, "I'm fixing Into the Spider-Verse. I've made it 60 frames per second, and I've, like, removed all the jittering and, like, smoothed everything out and color balanced everything to be right." And you're like, "That is so not the point of what that movie was about." You, like, took all of the things that were so intentional choices about, like, informing the artistry of that movie, and
Yeah.
you're like, "I made it better. I, like, barreled over everyone's creative decisions and desires for the thing that they made to make it what I want it to be."
Yeah.
And you're like, that sucks." Um,
If there was
and
like,
I'm
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
If there was like, if there was like two things that I could teach at like a public school or something, one of those is like, optimization, this idea, this obsession with optimization, it leads to less, optimization.
Yeah.
This idea of like everything has to make a specific number go up, it's not going to be everything. If you want things to be quick and cheap and easy to manufacture, they're not going to be good. If you want movies to be giant and have all these big budgets, they're not going to treat people well. Like, things come from somewhere, and everyone has this obsession, like, if we could just get the one number right, if we could just have the perfect person and everyone become like the perfect person, then everything would be perfect. And it's like, you don't know what perfect is. You don't know what anything is. If you did, everyone would just come to you for advice. But
Well, it's like efficiency, I feel like, diminishes the human experience, like, on both a, like, global sense and also an individualistic sense. Like, the requirement of my one-day delivery rug, in my previous analogy, is that, like, there is someone whose life is worse because I want it in a day. And
yeah.
it doesn't matter, like, realistically, that I get it in a day. If it, you know, that convenience mindset breeds this, like, desire for efficiency that is to the detriment of so many other people, and, like, in a very individualistic way, again, coming back to, like, process, the diminishing or creation of efficiency does nothing but to rob you of the experience of learning, and then you're just kind of like, which makes me feel old. It makes me feel like I'm, like, shaking my fist in my proverbial lawn, being like, "Oh, kids these days," because, like, I don't want to say that technology has somehow done this, because I don't think it's the technology that's done it, it's the application of how we use these techno
Yeah.
that creates a system that incentivizes the wrong part of the human experience. AI shouldn't make art. Art is the joy of the human experience. It can facilitate and support you in your learning as an artist or your growth of an artist, but, like, why do I need to toil in the mines while the machine makes art? That's weird.
Yeah.
We don't need to do that.
I always like to use this example of like there used to be this very direct transaction of like people made things for other people. And then in the middle, we got this little box that popped up, which was supposed to help distribute things. And for this example, we'll say this is YouTube, right? So it helps distribute things to more people so that you can have a wider reach. That's great and all. But this really insidious twist happened at some point where instead of us making art for people and this algorithm distributed it, suddenly now we are making things for this algorithm because it
Yeah.
has captured the audience and is now drip feeding it back to people who make things. And so is this really, really weird and insidious thing where it's like we made an algorithm to help us distribute what we made, and now we are making things for the algorithm.
There's, like, a really sad article that's written by the engineer who developed Immortal. So, like, on a social media app, how it will just, like, it's no longer chronological. It'll just keep showing you things
Mm-hmm.
where it's him being like, "I have created this, like, horrifying attention monster, and, like, I just have to be okay with that because, like, I know that if it hadn't been me, it would have been someone that, like, this was an inevitable leap forward in, like, capitalism that was going to happen, but, like, that I carry the weight and knowledge of knowing that, like, when these things happen, that it was me who made that decision public and, like, created this horrible thing." You're like, "That's messed up. I'm so glad that I don't push live services because damn,
Yeah, that's haunting.
the weight of that would crush me."
Yeah, and it's like this is one of the things that I think people need to learn about technology is like it's so new that people it's kind of like I said, going back to the magic example, it's like you pull a rabbit out of a hat and they go crazy, what's wrong with that hat? And it's like nothing. It's just the guy, you know, like technology is still just a tool used by humans. Everything done is still done by humans. There isn't anything crazy, you know, there's no magic hat where stuff comes out of that we've never found before. It's just things are happening way faster than we've seen. That's all that is, you know.
Mhm.
And in that way, I don't really blame a lot of the people online who I disagree with, or a lot of people in real life who I disagree with, who they're going like, "Oh my god, all this crazy stuff's happening with technology; it's ruining the world." And it's like, you know, I know people who are, you know, well into their 70s and 80s, and I know that they have not lived their whole life with this stuff. They don't have any immunity to technology. They have never grown up with it. They don't understand the scams and the phishing attacks
Mhm.
and all that. Like, how would I expect somebody who has only lived a quarter of their life with this stuff to be able to understand it as well as somebody who's grown up with it their whole life? You know, it's just a really efficient tool, and honestly, that's not a great thing.
Yeah, the thing that I hope for technology is that it becomes a intentional application because, like, we are running out of time for it to be willy-nilly. Um, but
I remember
yeah.
when cryptocurrency was a big hot button issue, there were people talking about, there was arguments about the power consumption of the current way of cryptocurrency, which, you know, there's people on both sides. There's people being like, it's using way too much power. And there's people on the other side being like, you know, technology advances. There's better ways to do this stuff. People use green energy for this stuff. And it's like, as much as I understand that there are ways to increase efficiency and to make things better, I think it's missing the point of like, hey, we don't need this. We don't need to be burning all of this energy. I don't care how efficient it is. If you light $100 bill on fire, I don't care how fast it burns. You just burned $100.
So I have two main cryptocurrency thoughts, one of which is that it frustrates me so deeply that there are actually things that the blockchain could be useful for, and yet we decided to use it for currency.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh no, I get
but like
that.
one of my favorite things in like a very Schadenfreudenistic way is when like someone loses all of their crypto money in a crypto scam, and then they're like, "Wah, government, help me. I've been scammed and defrauded with my crypto." And you're like, "You chose to put your money in a deregulated environment."
Yeah.
You're like, "Oh, no bank's gonna like tell me what to do." That's why we have banks. I have tons of problems with banks. But you know what I can do? If someone steals my credit card, I can call the bank and be like, "Someone stole my credit card."
It's this very funny
And they'll give me my
consequence.
money back.
It's this very funny consequence of people being like, rules are only bad. How dare they restrict me? And then they get robbed and they're like, help, help, someone enforce the rules.
Couldn't be me. Why?
There are two
Yeah.
things that make me very sad about blockchain. It's another example of nobody knows what's going on, and so they get tricked really easily. It's that technical illiteracy that it's very sad to see for me. There's a lot of places that there could be real usage for it and stuff like that. The other thing that makes me very sad is seeing all these people be like, we're gonna do it better. Because there's a very funny example of exactly how this decentralized, fully free market, democratized currency is not what you think it is, which is that there's a blockchain, and it was called, I believe it was Ethereum. But they went through and they did all their stuff, and they had this big old like centralized organization to like democratically make decisions about their, I don't know, blockchain corporation, whatever they want to call it. And then they messed up. And somebody who was very smart took advantage of their software, and they managed to siphon off 15% of all of their currency. They hacked into their thing and they stole all their money. And so that was obviously something that no one wanted, and they had a big decision to make. So what they did was they just rolled back everything that was stolen. They undid the steal, and they split it off into a different thing, which was they split it into Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, which just became the timeline where
they're like, just ignore that other one.
Yeah, it just became the timeline where something was stolen and the timeline where something wasn't. So now that's, if you really think that, this whole thing is anything different than new banks, you're wrong. If the people get their money stolen, they're just going to undo. They're going to press the undo button.
Oh, crypto. It's just one of those things. I remember for like a period, the folks that I was working with were working with like Ethereum people, and then they tried to pay us in Ethereum, and we were all like, no, pay us real money. Like, there's no guarantee that your currency won't crash multiple times a day. I would like real money. I can use.
Yeah, and this is one of those things that's like, people don't realize what they can do, and so when somebody repackages it with a Silicon Valley twist, they go like, wow, I can do this, I can make currency. And it's like, you could have always made a currency. You still have the problem of no one trusts you and that you don't have anything to offer.
There's nothing backing your currency.
If you were an entire country with like, mineral supplies and gross domestic exports and stuff like that, maybe people would take your money seriously. But you're a dude with half a backyard and you can't sell anything.
I totally forgot about Sealand, but I was watching a documentary of the British Isles, and then they're like, "We're gonna go visit Sealand." And I'm like, totally this, which is like a self-proclaimed nation of like 3 people that was done after the like BBC decided that it wasn't going to allow pirate radio anymore. And so a bunch of people were like, "We're gonna go onto this old oil rig and start our own country," and like just declared themselves Sealand.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, I
but that was like the 70s when people would be like, "Okay," because if you tried that now, everyone, "Yo, man, you okay?" Like, that's
yeah.
you need to talk to someone because that's a wild thing to do.
You reminded me of something I read, uh, an article I read a while back about something called the Seasteaders, and it was
Mm.
essentially a group of people who were libertarian, didn't like government, didn't like being controlled, and they had this brilliant idea, and it's buy a cruise ship and then sail it into international waters and then become your own country. um that was
Nothing ever goes wrong.
that was their idea, and they got decently far in it. And they wanted everything to be like you sign up and they made their own cryptocurrency, and they had like different options for like different rooms and stuff. And very quickly real life started catching up to them, and they started realizing like if you're always at sea, where does everything go? How do you get food? How do you get rid of waste? And so they had like offerings of rooms where it's like, yeah, you can have a dog, and it has like a square foot of like fake grass or something. I don't remember, but it was this whole thing where it's like it's terrible to live in a cruise ship for any long periods of time. And then there's also the issue of where do you park the thing? So
Yeah, if
they
you can't, like, go to another country 'cause no one recognizes you and they'd, like, arrest you immediately and be like, "What are you doing?"
they like parked off the coast of Thailand for a bit, and then the Thai police were like, "You can't do that. Leave." uh, so there's just like a lot of stuff, and then they had like because they bought like a cruise ship, and it was like a like at an auction, because you know they had like money, they were decently wealthy, the group that was trying to start it, but they weren't like buy a cruise ship wealthy, so they got like a cheap one, and then the engine gave out, and they were like, well, that's gonna be a lot.
I guess we die at sea.
Yeah,
Who could
so
have foreseen this? If only there was some sort of regulation about the safety of vehicles being sold at auction.
yeah, so
Oh, man, that's
there's
very
always
funny.
people trying to do their own stuff, and it never goes well. I just thought that was
I
such a
mean, like,
funny story.
yeah. I think the, like, mentality that one needs to go into in terms of starting something is different than what a lot of people think it is, because that's how you end up with cults.
Oh yeah.
Like, you don't buy a cruise ship to go live in the ocean and not have a it's really only cult outcome. Um, of, like, that you have to have a, like, actual group mentality of organizing and listening to each other. You can't just be like, "I've never thought about how governing happens at all, but I hate the government, so I will become the government." And you're like, "Have do you know what goes into, like, policy at all? Like, do you know why there's rules? Because
Yeah.
if the answer is there should just be no rules, then, like, you will just have abhorrent behavior in your community, and then it will become a cult."
Yeah.
Um,
I can't remember. There
so
was this one town that was like established as like a libertarian town, and they like didn't impose a lot of rules, and then it got like overrun by bears or something. I don't remember the whole story, but I remember something like that.
the bears are the real allies we all needed.
Let me see if I could look it up. Libertarian town bears is the result that autofills. How a New Hampshire libertarian utopia was foiled by bears.
All right.
Yeah, so believe if anyone's out there listening here, you don't know everything. I'm sorry, this is a radical idea you've never heard before. You don't know everything. You don't know how everything's made. As much as you might want to go and look at something and be like, that's stupid, it probably takes a lot more effort than you think.
Yeah. Turns out everything is hard.
We didn't make
And you don't
society for
know
no
exactly.
reason. It actually was a survival
Yeah.
thing.
Goods, services, trading, all very thumbs. No, it is one of the most deeply fascinating things when people do things like that. Because, like, I'm not even in favor of, like, large governmental bodies. I think that, like, much smaller organization makes sense. But when folks are just like, there should be no rules, you're like, okay.
Clearly, you
But
haven't
then,
put much
like,
thought into this.
yeah, like, but then what happens? Like, you physically cannot get all things done. Who weaves the, like, cloth for you to have clothing if you're gonna be fully outside of the, like, systems of creation?
Yeah.
Who grows the things that you then weave into, like, do you even know what plants you would need?
Yeah, and
Everything, far more complicated.
this is one of those things that I think has gotten really bad with the internet, which is this idea that people don't think in long enough time spans to really understand a lot. People talk
Mhm.
about like, every single like year there's people being like, I'm going to revolutionize the industry, and it's like you are you're thinking way too small. Like, we've been doing these things for a long time. Yeah, it might be nice to like, implement a computer at a steelworkers factory, but like there's a lot of other things to consider here. People are just constantly reinventing stuff that has already been done and pretending like they're the first person in the world to do it. It's just like there's so much disrespect for history and stuff like that.
The, like, because we started this conversation kind of on this topic where there's the, like, I wasn't in the room for any of the conversations having, so shut up, I have a better idea, and you're like,
Yeah,
"We've been talking about this for years." But, like, have you heard the term, like, move fast and break things for technology?
too much.
The thing that I hate about it as a thing is, like, I really need reality to stop breaking, actually. Um,
Move fast and break
I
things.
do
Oh my
not
god, there's
enjoy
water coming
living
out of the
in
wall.
interesting times anymore. I would like a break for, like, maybe even a couple of days of just things not constantly going, and that's, like, the way to make technological change is, like, yeah, you need to invest into figuring out what a community needs or wants, and then evaluate whether or not it needs to actually be changed, and whether or not the person who needs to change it is you.
Yeah. Uh,
Because, like, I don't know, yeah, that's a whole other part of this conversation, but
yeah. Something I always try to tell people is like, I know that you want your life to be like a Bruce Willis movie where you're gonna do everything on your
no, I
own
don't.
and be crazy, but let me tell you, the real answers are boring. The real answers behind everything are
Yeah.
boring. If you come up to me and you don't know anything about technology and I start talking about my job, you're gonna be like, wow, it's all fascinating. I'm like, no, it's not. It's actually not. It's cool that someone did it, but the reality is just that it's boring. How does the internet get across the ocean? We run a big wire. That's it.
Yeah, it's all cables.
It's not
It's
like
just
some
a really
magic.
long extension cord.
Yeah. Like I've told people that and they've not believed me. They've been like, that's not true. It goes through magic satellites that are totally non-latent. And it's like, yeah, people don't know these things.
It's just and sometimes things go wrong just 'cause, like, something random hits the giant tube.
Yeah.
Um, that's how I think about space trash. Space trash terrifies me.
Oh yeah, I've talked about that to people before too, and they're like, "Oh, what's the problem?" And I'm like, "You don't understand how fast things go up in space, do you?"
Yeah, and, like, one thing goes wrong, one calculation and there's no more telecommunication system. Like, it just all starts crashing into each other.
Yeah.
And there's a certain someone who keeps willy-nilly shooting rockets into space with a not great track record of being a thorough person.
Yeah. It's to me it's just like so sad because it's like we are in like an age of information, and the best strategy in the age of information is just lying. Is just
Yeah.
straight up lying to people about things, and there's so much out there that they just can't check, and they believe everything, you know?
Alright. Do we wanna bring this conversation full circle? Anything we wanna say about the beginner's guide?
I like rants. I don't feel a need to have a nice tidy bow on it, but thank you for playing the beginner's guide even if you hated it.
Yeah, thanks for sending it to me. I didn't say this, but you sent it to me on my birthday, so thank you. That was
No,
very nice of
I did that so on purpose.
Yeah, no, congratulations on your clairvoyance. This is how you've learned that you're clairvoyant.
Well, happy belated birthday. Thanks for hanging out. I don't want to keep you for longer than 3.5 hours or 2.5 hours, however long it's been.
Yeah, I do hopefully have work to do. And by that I mean I'm going to go back to doing GDD things. Um, in anticipation of talking to someone about figuring out how to get funding for this weird prototype I did for the
I is very fun because I have not met a lot of people as deep in the space of weird prototypes as you, and that's very fun. It's very fun to see that there's a lot of the experiments and weird stuff out there, because it's not as heavily shown off as a lot of other things.
No, it's something there are people who are trying, but I do think that that is the issue of games literacy. Um, there's just not really a way to necessarily get enough public interest for that type of thing to really take off enough,
Hmm.
um, and bring it to a wider audience. Shout out to Game Arts International Network for doing some of that work.
Um,
Um,
yeah, I think it's one of the sort of like catch-22 things about art is like art shouldn't necessarily be something um, that needs public viewing. You know, it needs everyone to see it for it to be valuable. But at the same time, it's like that's how you got to make a living.
yeah. And like making living as an artist is very hard. That's sort of the like I think there is great I think there is like a larger conversation that needs to happen and like how people get to make games. You read the weird document that I wrote that is maybe a manifesto. I'll put it in the manifesto category just slightly. Um, where like you don't have to be commercially viable to get to make games or get to make art. I think that's like a really tragic way of looking at the things that you do to sort of like expect only to be seen as a product. This is all the way back to the beginner's guide because that is the discussion of that work of being like it is horrifying to be seen and known by the public in this way, and I hate that for myself and for everyone. Um where like yeah, I want it to be easier for people to make, play, and enjoy games as a medium, but it has a mountain that is perhaps a molehill of public perception to get over. Just as comics did, because I think it's the closest industry to really speak to.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think the biggest difference between comics and modern modern games and stuff is that people are really caught up in this culture of attaching it to a person. You know, it's like as far as I know, people, there were always people who were like mad at writers and stuff, but it's not as much like, like content creators and game designers and stuff. Like they need a face now for people to yell at.
And also that I think, like, the internet makes it a lot easier to
Find that stuff.
properly threaten people in a way you couldn't in the past.
Yeah.
Just write a angry letter to the editor or something, but now it's like it's super easy to dox people.
Unfortunately, there's
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot to be said there, but I will let you go. Thanks for hanging out.
No worries.
Make stuff even if it's not seen, and art isn't something you do, and it is not your tools.
Yeah, everyone make art. Art's joyous. Go and sad, but also joyous. Sorry, I'll leave on a good note. Go make art.
I saw somebody once, like an art teacher or professor, recommend to like a group of students, they're like, just write like 10 poems and rip them up and throw them in the trash. Just
Oh, that was Oscar Wilde.
yeah, there you go. I can't remember where I heard it from.
A teacher made her students write a letter to their favorite author, and only Oscar Wilde replied. And he was like, "My homework assignment to you is to write poems and then tear them up and tell no one about them ever again. Enjoy making art." It's extremely paraphrased.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me. You're free to go.
Yeah, anytime. It was good chat.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me ramble publicly about thoughts.
Yeah, my goal is really just to get the most ranty people together, because that's kind of where I lie as well.
Hey. Sick. Always down for it then. I will go back to work though. Bye.
Bye. Well, I didn't really have anything else planned. Let's see if I want to work on stuff or not. I need to go take a break and eat something at least. Da, 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 da. No, where is... Don't worry about that. Yeah, what am I gonna do? I'm trying to open up the chat stuff I usually have, because I really just kind of showed up and started. I really like doing long conversations and stuff like that. I like talking about stuff. I kind of am just constantly talking about stuff to myself, so having someone to bounce ideas off of is always appreciated. I think there's a lot of really interesting topics that we covered. I love starting from one point and ending up in a totally different point, because I think that's just the way conversations work, and trying to limit them to be like this easily digestible thing is not... It's not my jam. It's not my jam. I'm gonna say it. I was really interested to talk to Len, because he was talking about just how much they didn't like the beginner's guide, which the story is meant to make you feel icky. And I think that's one of its strengths. I think there's a lot of fun talking about there's a lot of fun stuff to be fun is probably not the right word. There's a lot of interesting things. There's a lot of interesting things to be talking about. The interplay between love and like care and affection and stuff, and also like obsession, right? There's this very fun little thing where it's like uh, things get better as you care about them more, all the way up until they hit this steep peak where you care about them too much and it becomes bad, right? And you see that with the beginner's guide of like, you know, somebody being interested in artistic work and then suddenly them trying to take it for themselves. And put on some music because, oh god, that was loud. Turn it down more, please. Try there. If anyone has any questions about stuff, feel free to ask them, because I know we moved through a lot. I'm trying to remember what we went through. So we went from like beginner's guide, we went to like, I guess, games as art and parasocial stuff. Let's see. Yeah, tourism. I don't know what to say. Illusory attitude and the magic circle kind of stuff. Engaging with games, I guess. Yeah, because that's this part and this part. And then we went to like, I'm gonna put the fancy term for it, which is atomization of creation. You know, this idea that like everything is kind of being split apart into everyone has to do it on their own, which, you know, is not how anything has ever worked ever, and is largely due to this like smoke screen put up. What else did we go from there? AI. But AI and art. Do that, because there's a really interesting conversation there of like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's legally and ethically dubious about AI being trained on data that's not owned by the people who own the AI, stuff like that. But there's also the idea of AI robbing you of the chance to create art, which I think is also impactful. We talked about, this is one of my favorite things to like, favorite things in like a thematic way. It's really bad, but the idea of, we started out making things for people and then using an algorithm to help us, and then now we are making things for an algorithm and using people to help us. Ethereum, we talked about cryptocurrency and seasteaders and a town with bears. Talk about virtualization for a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, I've been going for 2.5 hours. I'm really trying to think if I should do anything else today. I could work on game stuff, which is this whole other section of notes. Oh, this is the game design discussion actually. This is the game stuff. I don't know if I have any great ideas there. Yeah, sure, we'll at least boot it up and see what's up. Not this. This. I could also work on... I had this idea. So let me... I had this idea because I wanted to iterate on stream avatars, because I don't like that it's a paid thing and that it has a lot of limitations. This seems like a great candidate for like an open source project, so that people can constantly be adding to it. I've had the idea of like, you know, just making it so that there's little characters and stuff going around the screen, a la stream avatars. I also wanted to make it so that they could change their gravity and be on any face of the screen. And I've thought about some different things you could do there, like maybe you could like slowly try to gather resources. I kind of want to make this like its own little game so that people can just mess with it if they want to. So let's see. Gather resources, maybe. Customize. Leveling. Parties? I think parties would be fun. Maybe like going on break, I could spawn like a boss and then people could try to fight it. I had the idea to have this like basically like screensaver thing, just like bonk 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 bouncing around. I don't know if it'd be like a hazard or not, but yeah, this is a very rough idea that I've let's see. I want to make a first game, but I'm also perpetually like dragging my feet about it because I have a lot of other ideas and a lot of other things that I want to do. I struggle with the idea of like it's gonna take a while and that's okay, you know. So this game is sort of based off of Pocket Tanks. Just want the picture. But yeah, it's sort of based off of Pocket Tanks, where it's just back and forth firing like that. Except I want it to be a lot more interactive. I want it to be, I want there to be more interesting physics and options and stuff. Right now I don't have a ton. I just have basic, like, you can select a person, you can change the power, you can change the angle, you can fire, and then it has some fancy particle effects, and you can select the other person and they can fire, and they have their own individual selections for things. The main thing I'm kind of dragging my feet on is making the turn manager, because that's gonna be a lot, I think. At least it doesn't fit in my brain very well right now. But yeah, I also have this cave game, which is a bigger project, but I keep working on it because it interests me. I want it to be like, how did I do this again? There it goes. So you could pick things up, you can use them, you can break through walls. I want it to be like a much bigger generative thing, with like a closed ecosystem of NPCs. It's way too much, but you know, Gotta try, right? I will probably take a break. I'll find someone to raid and then come back because I think my brain's a little tired and I need to eat and stuff. So let's find someone. Hey, Vish, you showed up right at the end. Yeah, I just had a long conversation about a lot of things, but it started out as a discussion about the beginner's guide, and then I just talked with Len on the Discord, and we were just talking about lots of different game stuff, lots of design concepts, lots of more than game stuff, like art things. You know, we had like a 2.5 hour discussion. So eat pizza. I'm not going to eat pizza, actually. I like taking notes while I'm talking to give some sort of visual stuff, and also just because it helps me like explain concepts better. Let's do Clayman. Yeah, it's always fun. I always like seeing the sprawling notes when I zoom out of stuff. Oh, I'm sad I did not get... Yeah, what the heck? I have a thing set up for when people raid, and it didn't happen, and I didn't realize. That's very sad. I do not know why it didn't work. Yeah, it should be capturing Firebot stuff. Is the overlay messed up? Overlay is ready, but nothing's connected. You're lying. It is connected. Whatever, I'll look at this off screen. Have I seen that one guy who zooms in and out like crazy on digital drawings? No, I don't know what you're talking about. Send a link if you have one. Oh, there was this thing. It's made in Godot. You think I should watch it? Yeah, send a link. I'll definitely check it out. Lorian. Yeah, I'll hang out for a little bit. I'm not in a rush. So this is an interesting project I wanted to try out. It's written in Godot, and it's a infinite canvas thing. So everything's written like an SVG, so you can zoom in and out, like indefinitely, I think. Which is very smart. But I wanted to try this out. Infinite and almost infinite zoom, infinite grid, distraction free mode. a little surprise mechanic when pressing F12. All right, I'll have to check that out. But yeah, the only issue is that if this is just drawing, if there's no text, that's gonna be a problem because I use a like trackball mouse. Mainly just because it's easier than moving back and forth all the time. But we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, that's something I wanted to check out. I have too many things I want to check out. I'm just... Let's see what this is. Oh, yeah. I've seen this. Yeah, the zoom in on art things and it just keeps going. I don't know what software this uses. But yeah, I really like this stuff. I want to look at how Lorien is done because one thing I've wanted to make is like a let me close this out. One thing I've wanted to make is like a map editor thing. No, not this, but I wanted to make like a map editor thing where there is it's like the typical view where you can zoom out and you see like these different points of interest and stuff. But I also want it so that you can zoom into these and that they like smoothly transition into their own maps, you know? So like basically just having the separation of like the map screen and then zooming in and then it just there isn't a like a cut between that. I just think that'd be cool to work with and try. I do like that kind of art. I'm terrible at art though. I suck at it, so I could probably learn with practice, but I'm okay. Yeah, that would be cool. Yeah. I have a lot of fun ideas, but I need to get more into the habit of just sitting down and making what I feel like that day. I'm kind of the person who's like all over, so it's hard for me to sit down and have a consistent routine without something specific in mind, but I need to be able to do that because that sort of consistent work needs to happen. I tried to draw a stick in it of a circle. Why do you think I use this program? It makes squares for me? Look at that. I didn't draw that, but it looks real nice. It helps a lot to basic diagrams and stuff and not have to worry about it. There's a lot more I would want to add in this sort of software, but it you know, it's free, it's open source, and it's good, so. Alright, I'm going to get a raid set up so that I can drink some water and stop talking. But thanks everyone who stayed, thanks Foolbox for the raid, and yeah, hope you guys got something out of that. I'm going to be rating Clayman Dev. He's working on a really interesting physics-based combat thing in Unity. Yeah, thanks for hanging out. Catch y'all later.